Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program Question and Answer. I'm Simbri Ross, a Grants Program Manager with HSEMA, with Charles Madden, our Grants Bureau Chief. Today we're going to review how to submit your application for this $100,000 funding opportunity. Charles, if you would, tell us about the $60 million available nationwide.
Okay, the 2019 Nonprofit Security Grant Program is a DHS FEMA grant program intended to support nonprofit entities in major urban areas that are 501c3 nonprofit entities. In the urban area portion of this grant, which is what we're going to be talking about here today, there's $50 million available nationwide for nonprofits within each of the major urban areas in the country. It's a fully competitive grant, meaning there's no pre-designated amounts set aside for each urban area. Every application can be a maximum of $100,000. So FEMA expects to hand out a number of these awards throughout the nation. The National Capital Region urban area is the urban area that we're dealing with here today. The District of Columbia Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency is the state administrating agent for the National Capital Region. DC is the core city for the region. It also includes Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland, and Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax, Alexandria, and Arlington in Northern Virginia. And any subdivision or political entity within that overall footprint is considered part of the National Capital Region urban area. If your organization is within that footprint, you'd be submitting your application to DC HSEMA, and we'll go through the specific application requirements shortly. The overall timeline is laid out on the screen here. The announcement was pushed out by FEMA on April 12th. We have set an internal deadline for submissions to come to DC HSEMA by the end of the day on May 17th. We then have to review and score these applications and submit them to FEMA in one package on May 29th. Just to go over that one more time, your application is due to us on May 17th. We're the ones that submit the application to FEMA, and so the May 29th deadline is for DC. Going forward, then, FEMA will make its final selection of which entities will be funded sometime in late July, we're estimating. And then probably sometime in September, before September 30th, FEMA will issue DC an award letter that includes the amounts for entities in the NCR that are going to be funded. The subaward period that we'll be issuing after we receive the award from FEMA, we'll issue subawards to each individual nonprofit that was successful, and we will issue that with a subaward period of 2 years initially, from September 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2021. There is a third year in the grant program for those entities that require it, but we're going to start off presuming that all projects can be finished within 2 years and reserve the third year for any extensions as needed on a case-by-case basis.
Your application requirements consist of your submitting 3 documents to our office. The first will be an investment justification, in which you will indicate the year of construction of your facility, whether you're a 501c3 organization, as well as your DUNS number. You'll also submit to us a mission statement as a separate document where you indicate the purpose of your organization, as well as a risk and vulnerability assessment. All 3 documents are necessary in order for your application to be complete. Please keep in mind you can submit multiple investment justifications for every facility or location that you occupy for multiple sites. You may submit multiple applications of $100,000 each, but again, it must be a location that you occupy.
We're going to go through the investment justification itself. This is the Excel spreadsheet. This is the only portion of the application that is actually scored. So what we'll be doing on the presentation today is going through each section of the application, explaining what kind of information is needed in each section, reviewing the scoring criteria for that section, and reviewing how many points towards the overall score each section consists of. So primarily, we're going to be focusing on just how to make the template work and how to answer each question in sequence.
In case you have not been provided with the scoring worksheet as a tool, please contact our office and we can make it available to you for review.
So what we're displaying now is the Excel template for the investment justification for 2019 NSGP as it looks like when you first open it. The very first thing I would like to point out is when you open this file, you'll most likely see some kind of warning or notice or request come up at the top asking to either enable editing or to make this a trusted document of some kind. This is to enable the functionality of the form, so please do click that button and enable the editing or enable the permissions in the form, because if you don't, then the form won't be available for you to write in and you won't be able to enter data. Before we start actually going through the investment justification itself, I would like to point out that at the bottom of the workbook, there are two worksheets in this Excel document. There's the investment justification, which is the template that you submit, but also there's an introduction tab. And in here, there's written instructions on how to open and enable the functionality of the form. So it's the same as what we were just describing a few seconds ago, going over how you need to open up the form, enable the content. It also includes instructions on how to save the template. So we'll cover this right now. FEMA does want it saved into a specific format. It needs to be saved as an Excel 97 to 2003 format. So when you're saving the document, don't just click Save, but in the drop-down menu on the click Save As, and then select out of the options for the different file formats you have, select the Excel 97 to 2003 format and make sure you're saving the file in that manner. This must be something that FEMA needs to because of the way they extract the data from it. It's their form, so we can't change that portion of the instruction. So please do follow those instructions when you're opening and saving the file to make it work for you. Getting back into the investment justification itself, the first section basically is information about your organization.
In the very first block, you'll be indicating the legal name of your organization. Thereafter, you'll complete a block which indicates the physical address of your facility. Be sure to include the county where your facility is located, as well as the year of original facility construction. Again, do not give us an approximation of how old your structure is, but the actual date of original construction. Thereafter, you'll indicate your organization's ideology, beliefs, and mission. You'll have 400 characters in which to state that. And you will also, in the next space, indicate the membership and community served by your organization. Regarding 501c3 tax-exempt designation, you're not going to be asked to provide a number for your 501c3 tax exemption. In fact, you will only need to answer yes or no to that question. The only number that you must supply or indicate in the form, the investment justification, is your actual DUNS number. So your DUNS number needs to be complete. In terms of the Urban Area Security Initiative, you will select from the drop-down menu, National Capital Region, and you will also indicate your funding request. $100,000 is the maximum amount possible under this grant program, but if you are seeking less, you can write less than that amount as your funding request. You may also indicate in the total project cost the amount of your project which may exceed or be less than your funding request. Also, please indicate whether you have any contracts with DHS. That does not mean whether you have had a previous grant or subaward, but whether you are under contract with DHS to provide services in some capacity. The final area that you will have to complete in the first page of the investment justification is whether the phase of this investment is new or ongoing. If you've never received a subaward in the past, then you would select new or type in new. Or if you have received subawards in the past or grants in the past from the nonprofit grant program, in all likelihood for you, this investment phase would be ongoing. Again, you would select from a drop-down menu one of those two options.
Okay, so that covers the first page of the introductory information. This section is not scored. It does need to be complete, but it is not counted towards the overall investment score. Getting into section 2, the background. This section is for you to describe your organization, describe the symbolic value of the site, describe what factors make it a significant possible target for terrorism, and also describe any previous or existing role in responding to or recovering from terrorist attacks. This section is worth 2 points out of the possible 40, so it's not a high scoring section, but it does need to be complete. The easiest way to lose points here is to not address both questions and fully address the questions that are being asked. Since this is the first scored section, I do want to go over the best practice here, which is to read the question, but also to refer back to the scoring criteria and read what the scoring criteria are. That's what we'll be looking at when we're reviewing your applications. So it's useful to look at not just the question that's being asked, but also how the scoring criteria is applied to that question, just to make sure you have a full context when you're entering your information. So in this section, the first part is to describe the symbolic value of the site as a highly recognized national or historic institution or significant institution with the community that renders the site a possible target of terrorism. And the second section is describe any previous or existing role in responding to or recovering from terrorist attacks.
So we are going to be looking for you describe your nonprofit or organization. Did you provide information about its symbolic value? Did you tell us about your role in response and recovery? Again, for 2 points.
Getting into the next section, this is your risk. And this is one of the most important sections of the application. It's worth 12 points out of the total score of 40. And this is basically you explaining to us and to FEMA what your threats are, what your vulnerabilities to those threats are, and what the potential consequences of that threat is. DHS views risk in those 3 areas, so that's why it is broken up into 3 distinct questions, each with a maximum score of 4. First is threat. And this is what is the threat posture that you see of threats coming your direction. What entities out there have either a current interest or historic interest in attacking organizations of your type or kind? What similar attacks have occurred either in this region, in this country, or around the world? This is basically what you see as the things that are threatening to you. This is not where you would address your facilities' vulnerabilities. That's in the next section. The biggest mistake we see applicants do in this area is that to mix and match threat and vulnerability and capabilities to respond throughout all 3 questions. Please do be disciplined in addressing threat only in the threat section, addressing vulnerabilities only in the vulnerability section, and then addressing consequences only in the consequence section. That's the easiest way to maximize your point gain in each section.
And again, regarding threat, it's worth a maximum of 4 points out of 40. We're going to be looking for how well did you address the findings from previously conducted risk assessments or police reports or insurance claims. And as Charles mentioned, this is the area that you can refer to matters that have been reported to the police, or if you are a synagogue similar to Tree of Life Synagogue, and you think that there are parallels which make you at risk in terms of a threat, you can cite that, or any international events such as mosques that are similar to those in New Zealand. So this is what would be emphasized in this section, threat.
As Embry mentioned, a generic statement of threat, while it can be helpful, you may also find your application is strengthened with a more specific statement of why your organization specifically are under threat than others that might be similar. If that is the case, if you have documentation or proof or a rationale for why that is the case, this would be the place to say it, because that would make that section read more strongly than other entities that have just a more generic threat posture. In the next section, vulnerability, this is where once you've described what your threat is, now you get into describing why your facility is vulnerable to that kind of threat. And this is really about the security gaps, the weaknesses that you see in your facility's security posture. You should discuss your organization's susceptibility to destruction, incapacitation, or exploitation by a terrorist attack. A couple of things that we've seen in the past that might not be the best things to put in here would be discussions of non-violent criminal activity that might be occurring in your area. We have seen discussions of graffiti or drug dealing in the neighborhood that isn't necessarily something that's going to really touch directly on the vulnerability to a terrorist attack, or if you're going to mention that, you need to make that connection for us so we can understand why you believe that that's a vulnerability that's relevant to terrorism.
Things that you might consider mentioning are whether you have an unsecured perimeter, whether you're unable to secure doors of your facility, your proximity to high traffic areas which would make you vulnerable from vehicular attacks, or if you have open access to your entrances, stairwells, and elevators. Again, these are the types of things that you would mention in this section, vulnerabilities. For the next section, consequences, we also will be looking at how well did you address negative effects on your organization's assets, systems, or networks if damaged or disrupted by terrorist attacks. Again, this is worth 4 points. Here we're looking for the disruption of services that your facility provides, the disruption of schools if you happen to be a school. If your facility symbolic structure, what might be the psychological effects even worldwide if you were attacked? And clearly things along the lines of mass casualties should be mentioned in terms of potential consequences. Each box within risk is worth 4 points for a total of 12 out of 40 points for this part of the application.
And so the risk section that we just covered is the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequence. And now we move into the next section, section 4, target hardening. This is all about what you intend to do with the nonprofit security grant funds if you are a successful applicant to mitigate those threats, those vulnerabilities, or those consequences. So that you don't need to discuss, again, in any great detail what your perception of threat is in this section. You've already done that in the previous section. Now you just tell us what you plan to do about it. So this is really what you will do with the grant funds if you do receive it. So please do explain here in the narrative section, which is the first box, what your project is going to consist of. If you're intending on putting or enhancing fencing around your property, to describe what that is. If it's security lighting, if it's improving doors, windows, security features, this is where you would describe that in as great detail as you can. And also, please be sure to align your proposed costs to the allowable costs that are in the grant guidance. The Notice of Funding Opportunity, as well as the FEMA Preparedness Grants Appendix that discusses allowable costs for the nonprofit grant in greater detail, is available on the HSEMA website, and we can also send that to you. The allowable costs for the nonprofit security grant are focused on enhancing security at your facility to prevent against acts of terrorism. Equipment is an allowable cost. Training for security personnel on security-related training is an allowable cost. Security-related planning and security-related exercises are also allowable costs. New this year also is contracted security personnel. This is the first year this is an allowable cost in the nonprofit security grant program, so this is a change. It is an allowable cost to pay for contracted security personnel to protect your facility. It is not allowable to hire security personnel, so you would not be able to use nonprofit grant funds to add to your employee count, but you could contract for security personnel. If you are going to include that in your application, please just be very clear about what that cost is going to consist of and what their functions would be in the context of protecting your facility. When it comes to equipment, as it's written in the investment justification template, you can see that they call out two specific types of equipment as being the allowable equipment categories. This is FEMA Authorized Equipment List, or AEL, Section 14, Physical Security Enhancement Equipment, and Section 15, Inspection and Screening Systems. Those are the two allowable types of equipment. Now, there are some subcategories beneath that as well. And we can send out to anybody who wants it a redacted version of the AEL that only includes the allowable costs for nonprofit grant in AEL Section 14 and 15. If you are going to identify equipment from those categories, in the listing of purchases beneath, you would want to list the AEL number for those articles of equipment that you intend to purchase. One other note of caution on the authorized equipment list, you would probably want to make sure that you do not indicate purchases of any equipment that appears in other sections of the AEL that are not 14 and 15. That would be a clear indication that those would not be allowable costs.
And just so that you are reminded of the 40 points possible on your application, this section has a possible point of 14, 4 points regarding how well does your project mitigate risk or identify vulnerabilities, another 4 points regarding how well does your project focus on prevention or protection against those risks from a terrorist attack, 3 points if your project is allowable, and another 4 points if your project is feasible. We're asking you to not only include what your project consists of as part of the narrative, but also as part of the grid. So meaning if you're going to select surveillance equipment or access control equipment, please remember to fill out the type of equipment within the grid, and please select the proper AEL code. We cannot emphasize enough that the improper AEL code is disfavored by FEMA and can result in a lowering of your score by FEMA such that you may not receive a grant or subaward.
So as you can see, the target has two major portions. One is the narrative section, where you can write out your proposed project in sentence structure. And then beneath that is a listing of the individual items of cost that make up your proposed project. And this is where the AEL number field is. If you're purchasing all equipment, you would list AEL numbers for each item of equipment. If you are also doing some non-equipment purchases, such as training, planning, exercise, or the contracted security personnel, those don't have AEL numbers. So when you're listing them here, you just would leave the AEL number field blank, and then describe the item to be purchased, explain briefly which vulnerability that you've addressed earlier in the application will be that this purchase supports, and then the dollar amount associated with that element of cost. Please ensure that you use this section here to list all of the items of cost that will make up your entire application. So if you're applying for $100,000, you would enter items in this listing here that add up to $100,000.
In the next section, milestones, we're looking for your completion of the steps necessary to accomplish your project. Commonly, to receive 4 points, we'll see steps such as selection of a vendor, a step regarding or a milestone regarding the purchase of equipment, another regarding the installation of equipment and training on equipment. We want to get a sense from you step by step of what's necessary to complete your project, and if it is well described, the maximum points available are 4 points.
So the milestones should be clear. They should be detailed enough so we understand what that milestone consists of, and they should provide some kind of logical sequence from start to finish of your project. You may want to account for the fact that we won't issue these awards until probably the very beginning to middle of October, so you wouldn't want to have milestones before that. And then the very first thing that a successful recipient will have to do is to get the FEMA's Environmental and Historic Preservation Review completed. And that can take several weeks to several months. So again, you might want to account for that first couple of steps of needing to get the Environmental and Historic Preservation Review completed before you start then indicating other milestones for actual project initiation. So I would suggest that all applicants take that into account as they're laying out their milestones, to account for some of those initial steps that have to be done before the project can really commence. And the start date and the completion date, try to make those realistic, and I think it would be better to identify start and completion dates that make sense and that lead to a sequence of events. So milestone 1 leads into milestone 2, leads into milestone 3, as opposed to just putting the full 2 to 3 year period of performance, September 1st, 2019 to August 31st, 2022, on every single milestone. That doesn't lead to a sequence of events and doesn't make a lot of sense.
The next section, project management, is worth 3 points. We're looking to see how well did you justify the effectiveness of your proposed management team, your roles, responsibilities, and governance. We want to see how the person named, in terms of their experience, how that person is best able to comply with the terms of the grant. Completion of grant documents, things to be considered, completion of things such as project management plans or quarterly status reports, as well as the submission of financial reimbursements. We also want you to note your past coordination with state and local Homeland Security partners. If you've dealt with a Homeland Security agency in the past, you might indicate in what way you have either received their assistance or provided assistance or worked on their behalf. So we want to see the coordination between your facility, your organization, and local Homeland Security partners, again, for a maximum possible of 3 points out of 40.
And section 7 is the impact. This is basically the so what moment in the application. You've already described your risks, your threats, your vulnerabilities, your consequences of an attack on your facility. You've already described the project that you intend to accomplish. And here is the place where you get to wrap it all up and explain how completing this project will improve your security status. So this is basically the output of the project. So if, for instance, you said your biggest threats were open access to vehicles that might ram or vehicle-borne explosive device could be delivered to your facility, and then in your project target hardening, you described bollards and barricades preventing vehicle access to the front of the building, this would be where you'd explain, and here's why that's important, here's why this project makes us safer. So this is really the capstone where you wrap it all up and explain the impact that this project, if successfully completed, would have in improving your security.
And even more specifically regarding a measurable outcome for bollards to protect against vehicular attack, you might just indicate clearly that no unauthorized vehicles were able to enter into your property or within your space without permission or authority.
So you'll notice that this section has two questions. The first is, what are the measurable outputs and outcomes? And that's what we've been discussing up till now. And then the second question is, how does this project and its outputs support FEMA's national preparedness goal and core capabilities? Now, these are terminology that FEMA uses to explain how it views the universe of Homeland Security. So what we've displayed on the screen now is, rather than ask you to research the entire National Preparedness Goal, what we're displaying here is where you can find the National Preparedness Goal if you wish to look it up yourself, but also we're suggesting those core capabilities within the National Preparedness Goal that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program almost certainly will be addressing. There's very few projects that would be considered that would not support one of these four core capabilities. So in this second section, just choose one of these four core capabilities: access control and identity verification, cybersecurity, physical protective measures, or screening, search, and detection, or more than one of those. List them here, and I would suggest using those exact names that we put there. Those are the names of the core capabilities, and just in writing explain how your project supports that core capability. This is an easy couple of points to get in this section if you just address that head on, and as we've instructed, if you skip this section, it wouldn't be possible to get full points because your response would not be complete.
And in the final section, your funding history, you must indicate whether you've received funding in the past. Yes or no, there's a drop-down menu. If you have received funding in the past, you're going to be asked to provide the years of that funding and the funding amount for each grant that you've received, as well as the investment type. Please note that this year, 10-point bonus is available for those organizations that have never ever received a nonprofit security grant. So that is something to keep in mind regarding scoring for 2019.
And then the very last section is the applicant contact information. This is just for the person who ends up submitting the application to just indicate their name and email address or phone number and check the box next to it certifying that you are authorized to submit this application on behalf of that nonprofit entity.
If you have any questions, you will be able to email us. Information will be available on our website in terms of contacting Sembry Ross, as well as available in our PowerPoint presentation. We also hope to make available questions that have been asked in a previous webinar, which might be forthcoming with information that will be useful in your completion of this year's grant application.
So once you've completed all your applications, please do submit them per the instructions on our website by email to sembry.ross@dc.gov. That email address is displayed here, as well as to ncr.saa@dc.gov. And those instructions are also available on the HSEMA website. So good luck to all applicants, and we look forward to receiving your applications.
Thank you.